Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, rounding third, heading home in our Big Ten previews. Today we had number four on Rod's list, the UCLA Bruins. From traditional Big Ten country in Southern California, the Bruins enter their second year in the conference, looking to build on last year's success. A reminder before we start that you can head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to be one of the long list of supporters to the show. And in addition, for being recognized as being awesome, you also get an ad-free version of the show that sometimes comes out early as well. All right, Rod, let's talk about the Bruins, who were had an interesting season in the first an inaugural season for them in the Big Ten. Mick Cronin led the way for the Bruins. They ended up going 23-11 overall, 13-7 league. They were knocked out in the second round of the tournament by Tennessee. Good offensive team. They were not great shooting team. They were really good defensively, which is what we anticipated with Mick Cronin as the coach. They created a lot of turnovers, and people famously probably remember the travel would become an issue for Cronin partway through the season. I think it was like maybe January or February. UCLA went out. They had a back and forth. It wasn't actually like a 3-game trip. It was like a 1 game out in the East Coast. They came back. They got annihilated by Michigan at home. Then they flew back out east, lost one or two more, I think, to like Maryland. And I don't know if they played Penn State or Rutgers or something like that.
It was Rutgers next. Yeah.
Yeah, they lost a couple there.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was, and then they flew back to Los Angeles and they played some games there. They obviously beat Michigan State in a real close game that unfortunately we were able to see firsthand. So he complained about the travel, which is something that, all right, that's sort of like complaining about the weather at some point because, it's sort of the fate that UCLA has picked in order to fill their coffers. But it's definitely a real thing. It's something they felt, but they seem to kind of figure it out by the end of the season, and they ended up being a pretty good team. They're 5-5 on the road, so it's not like they were a disaster. You consider going 500 on the road in the Big Ten, I think probably pretty good. I think with now that it's a little more unbalanced schedule, that 5-5 is either better or worse than it was in the past. But either way, it wasn't too bad. So they're going to come into the next year, and I mean, overall, I think they did okay considering, and they were about where you thought they're going to end up. I think in the
yeah,
standings.
it was pretty close. So one thing I'll get into the travel in a minute, but I would agree with that. I think that it was a decent transition season because the fact is they're coming into a better, deeper league than they're used to. That's just the facts. And I think, you look at that record, not bad. There were times last season where I thought they looked like they might be better than that. And there were definitely times where they looked worse. So all in all, they probably ended up about where they deserved to be. You mentioned Mix. It wasn't just about the travel. The bigger thing after the Michigan loss was he called his team soft.
Right.
And they were. In that game, they were incredibly soft. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember watching it because that was a game where, if I remember correctly, I think Michigan had a big lead. UCLA came back. I mean, big, like well into double
digits. It was like
digits.
20.
UCLA right, came back, took the lead, and then caved. And Michigan ended up winning it in a walk at Pauley. And he was furious. And he took a lot of crap nationally for that. Yeah. But, I remember saying at the time, you know what? Mick Cronin's a pretty good coach. I don't think he's an elite coach, but he's probably that next level down. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to bet that he knows his team. And I'm going to further bet that he probably has a pretty good idea, more so than any media member, as to what buttons to push. And I think in general, when you look at what happened with that team, I think it worked. It certainly didn't go the way that so many in the media were suggesting, which is that Mick Cronin's lost his team and they're going to just fall apart. Far from it. They rallied, ended up having, again, a solid season. It's UCLA. So it's not a year that anybody's going to remember, given what it takes. I mean, you and I walked around Pauley Pavilion and, you see the evidence of what that school has been in the past, and you understand that, hey, it's national championship or bust, basically, at that place. Final Four at a minimum. And you understand it. Yeah. But I think all in all, I don't think a bad first year into a new league. Now, the travel thing. You mentioned UCLA was 5-5 on the road. That's pretty good. Yeah, 500. You figure you do that, and you're a good team that takes care of business at home. They did lose twice, but if you take
Yep.
care of business at home, you split your road games. Most years, you're going to be in the upper pack. You're going to be right around, hovering around title contention most years. The thing is, though, UCLA was just 2-5 on the road in the central or eastern time zones.
Right.
So 3 of those 5 road wins came against their fellow West Coast teams. I think that tells you what the impact of the travel is. I really do. Or at least it's a strong indicator to me that I know we've talked about it a lot here leading into last season, during the season, and we're talking about it again. But I think for good reason. UCLA, I expect to be very good. Obviously, I'm picking them fourth, right?
Yep.
And I think most years, more often than not, you're going to expect UCLA to have a pretty competitive team. That's a normal thing there. But I'm telling you, if they're thinking about winning Big Ten championships, they're going to need to be decisively better. Not
Yeah.
just maybe even with the best team by a hair. They're going to need to be decisively better than everybody else. That's a tall task. I'm not saying they can't do it or they won't do it from time to time. They might. The program is good enough that it could,
Yeah.
but it's I don't see UCLA likely going on runs like we've seen Purdue or Michigan State go on, where they
Yeah.
win it 3 years in a row or two
Right.
out of three. I just don't see it because
Yeah.
I think the road handicap is so big that again, you've got to be not just as good or a little better than everybody else. You got to be a lot better.
Yeah.
And that's a
Yeah. And there
that's
aren't
a
a whole
hard
lot of
thing to
cream
do.
puffs. Yeah. There aren't a lot of cream puffs in the Big Ten. There are some, but not a whole lot. You can only play Penn State so many times or Minnesota.
And even the supposed cream puffs, even if you're playing a team that's in 15th or 16th place in this league, but you're playing at their gym
Yeah.
and they're in the
Rutgers last year,
central and
right? Yeah.
eastern time zone
Yeah.
and maybe it's your second game in that time zone, so you're tired and you've been on the road for, 5 days, 6 days, you can lose those games. That's the
Yeah.
thing. The traditional the schools in the traditional Big 10 footprint have it really easy by comparison because they make one trip. And I think, if not in all cases, it's in the vast majority of them. They do exactly what Michigan State did last year. They go out there and they play those games back to back. So it's one trip and you're
Yep.
done.
Right.
Those guys are making like 4 or 5 trips. That's a huge difference when you're talking about trying to win a league. Now, it also it should be noted, none of that means that UCLA can't compete for Final Fours and national championships while maybe not winning the Big Ten. That's true.
Right. Sure.
I'm just talking about Big Ten title contention. I think it's going to be really hard for them.
Yeah.
And the other 3 schools too, but UCLA is the one you mentioned first because they're typically the best of the bunch.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's important to note too that even after Mick Cronin calling out his team, they still lost a couple of games back out east. They didn't win
Yeah,
out east, lost a couple of games, and that's when everyone's like, "Oh, the team is just finished." And to your point, I think he had his team figured out, or at least he felt he knew the buttons to push, and it seems like he had the right ones. Yeah, the only teams worse, I think, as far as travel go, were the new additions to the ACC, Stanford and Cal. I mean, they have nobody to even play within their time zone aside
that's
from each other,
true.
like one game,
That's a good
and then they're
point.
playing everything, and then every one of their games, I think, is in the East Coast. Maybe there's one, or maybe there's one in the Central
Um,
time zone. I'm
no, I
not
don't think so.
sure. I
I
can't
don't
remember
think
who's in the
so.
ACC now, but I think they're mostly in
You're
the Eastern
right.
time
You're
zone.
right.
So
That is
anyway,
worse.
that
Yeah.
is probably rough.
But those schools
But
were grateful to get that lifeline. They'll take it.
oh yeah, I'm sure Washington State and Oregon State would love to have had that opportunity to join that league or any league really. Besides,
Right.
I don't. Are they in the Mountain West now? I don't even know what's happening this year. To be honest with them, Do you know?
I don't think the new Pac-12 has started yet.
Right.
I think maybe they're affiliated with the WCC for another year. I'm not sure.
Yeah, still waiting to see if Alaska Anchorage wants to join. Um, so that, of course, season recap was brought to you by Nudge Printing. They're the sponsors of our longest sponsor of the show. Great Spartan apparel, just like the t-shirt I'm wearing now. Super comfortable. I've told you a million times. I'll keep telling you because it is absolutely true, and you absolutely want to get your hand on one of these things, especially now the basketball season is getting closer. Make sure you grab some stuff. You can get some hoodies now that it's getting cold here, fall in Michigan. You can head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com and get 20% off if you type in Final Four just as one word at checkout. Also, don't forget that we have the Beat Rod contest. We are now at number 4 in Rod's list. So Rod has a prediction 1 through 18, which he has not been great. So you can have a good chance of beating Rod. And of course, unfortunately, you have to beat everybody else. So send your entries 1 to 18 to me, Eric at tffinots.com. Make sure again 1 to 18, and then have the amount of points Michigan State scores against Michigan next year, and that'll be both games. So 140, for instance, if you think they're going to score 70 points each game. So send that along to me. It's free. Gift cards to Nudge Printing for the winner and the runner-up. So do it today. You'll be glad you did. Head on over to Nudge Printing. All right, so let's talk about UCLA's players now, those departing, key departures, and retention. And we'll begin with Kobe Johnson. He's a transfer wing from USC. He scored almost 8 points a game, almost 6 rebounds a game, and shot 46, 36, and 70.
And his main calling card was actually on the defensive end, where
Right.
I think he was about as good and versatile a perimeter defender as there was in the conference. He was very, very good, maybe underrated. Uh, and you know the offensive numbers. You look at those shooting numbers. He was pretty efficient.
Not
I
bad.
just think they didn't get enough out of him on the offensive end. But, you know, solid year, certainly. Just maybe, I think maybe they had hopes that he might contribute a little bit more as an offensive player, as a scorer. But all in all, I'll tell you this, he was a key component of that number 5 turnover creation defense for
Right.
sure. So he, make no mistake, I mean, he was a good player for them, but I think they just thought he might be a little more impactful.
And then another key departure is Dylan Andrews, 6'4" guard, averaging almost 7 points a game, 3.4 assists per game, shot 38, 33, and 70. He's going to transfer to Boise State for his senior season.
Yeah, and I guess the way I read that is, well, a couple things that he understood that UCLA was going to hit the transfer market looking for an upgrade because Andrews was shared some of the point guard duties the last couple of years. And I think it was probably that they were looking to maybe make an upgrade, and he saw the writing on the wall.
Right.
And then when you transfer, because he had a pretty good season 2 years ago, and last year wasn't great, but it wasn't horrendous. It's just his playing time slipped. But for him to go down a level to the Mountain West to Boise State, that tells me that it's at least partially about his wanting to be a focal point, which wasn't going to happen at UCLA. He wasn't ever going to be the focal point of this team
Right.
offensively. So probably the right move for both parties, I guess.
And finally, we have Sebastian Mack, who averaged 9.6 points a game, shot 43, 31, and 74. He was a guy who was a little streaky. I think a solid player, but he's going to end up heading out to Missouri.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Missouri can harness some consistency that Mick Cronin couldn't, because Sebastian Mack had to be one of the more maddening players for Cronin to coach, because as you use the word streaky, that's putting it mildly. I mean, he was wildly inconsistent. When he was focused and he was on, he was a very, very good offensive player, a very difficult cover. When he wasn't, he could disappear. And you know, I don't know. I don't know if UCLA's position here was good riddance or whether they wanted to keep him and were unable to. I'm not sure. But he's one of those guys, and you know, I'll cite a recent example, Michigan State with AJ Hogard, where you've got a player who's just good enough to drive you crazy because you see just enough of the
Yeah.
high end of what they can be to understand that that player is in there somewhere, but you can't get it out of them on a night in, night out basis. And so you got to suffer with a lot of subpar performances before you get to the high level stuff. So it'll be interesting. Sometimes a change in environment is all it takes, and a guy finds consistency. Maybe that'll happen with Mac at Missouri, but at his best, he was a weapon for UCLA. Just wasn't at his best all the time.
Well, one crew that's always at their best are the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned or your house washed, head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can find the links in order to get an estimate from Troy and his team in the greater Grand Rapids area. Whether it's your home, business, high rise, whatever it might be, they can come out and take care of the building, make sure it's nice and clean. That includes the interior part as well. And get it done now before winter hits, before it's a little too late. So get that done today. And again, that's at tffinots.com/support. You can also mention Final Four to get 15% off your estimate. And Troy's team will do fantastic work. They've taken care of my house. You won't regret it, I promise. So we'll talk about key retained players, and we'll begin with Tyler Bilodeau, 6'9", 240-pound power forward. He averaged 13.5 points a game, 4.6 rebounds a game, shot 50, 40, and 72. So he's definitely a stretch for good guy, a good player, and solid all around.
Yeah, he's I think set for a big senior season. He is a very skilled offensive player. He's big enough and skilled enough to get some things done in the post. He's got some post moves, and yet, 40% shooter on decent volume from three. He can also hit the mid range, so he's a three-level guy. Um, in those ways, I think pretty clearly one of the better power forwards in the Big Ten. Not too many guys I'd take before him.
Yeah.
My issue with him is more only 4.6 rebounds. UCLA was, despite a decent amount of size, and they were not a consistently good rebounding team. And if I'm Mick Cronin, I'm looking at Bilodeau, that's what I want to see improve. Offensively, he's got everything that you need. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you feel very confident about what you're going to get from him. But where he needs to take a step, in my opinion, is at both ends on the glass. But even if it's just, say, defensive rebounding, you know, I look at him, who he reminds me of a little bit is somebody like Joey Hauser, where Joey finally, his last year, got consistent as a defensive rebounder and was
Mm-hmm.
about as good as there was in the league in that category. That's the kind of step I think Bilodeau needs to take to really go from very good player to a guy that you think about as an all Big Ten kind of player. Because the offense is going to be there.
Yeah. And then we have Eric Daly, who's a 6'9" junior, averaged 11.5 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, shot 51, 38, and 72. He was a little bit of a surprise, I guess, to me. He's a guy who I think was I always felt like he was underwhelming in the sense like and maybe that's not the right word, but I wasn't expecting a whole lot. Yet he definitely would perform because you definitely think Bilodeau, and Daly was sort of like the second guy, but good player.
Yeah, they expected a lot out of him. He had a very good freshman year at Oklahoma State.
Right.
The issue was there was a lot of traffic. There were a lot of guys that were competing. UCLA was, at least in my opinion, was the only team in the league that I thought came even close to matching up with Michigan State in terms of their depth.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between the teams was they didn't ever get it sorted out as clear cut a fashion as MSU did, where guys were in certain roles, they understood it, they thrived in those roles. UCLA, there was a lot of back and forth in that. And I'm not blaming Mick Cronin for it. I think it had to do with the players. They didn't
Yeah.
get consistent performances. So, but Daly put up a good season, but it was an inconsistent one. When he was assertive offensively and he had it going, good things for that team tended to happen. When he wasn't, they could struggle some. So he's an important player in that regard. They need him to be more consistent. But the talent to be a serious impact guy is there. Even though he's 6'9", he can and almost certainly will start at the three. So he'll be a very big wing. That again, 4 rebounds a game, I think he can do better than that. And I think he should do better than that. And I think they need him to do better than that in that category.
So the next player we're going to talk about is one who I think is a guy where the transfer portal has kind of worked. And that's Sky Clark, 6'1". He's senior guard this season. He played really well last year after having really tough years at Illinois and then Louisville, where just things just never kind of clicked. He averaged 8.5 points a game, 2.7 assists to just 1.1 turnovers. He shot 46, 40, and 78. And I mean, he was a much better player than I expected after just not able to get anything going at the previous two stops.
Well, I think one thing that helped is he had been cast coming out of high school as a point guard. And I
Yeah.
think what helped him last year, he chipped in with on-ball minutes, but he was mostly an off-ball guy. He was mostly a guy they looked to provide perimeter shooting, and he thrived in that role. So I think maybe putting a little less on his plate in
Hmm.
terms of ball dominance actually made him a better player. But regardless, you're right. This is one where the portal worked. He's from LA originally, so he wound his way back home after. And remember, what you just said doesn't even include that originally he committed to Kentucky, never played
Oh,
there.
right.
He got
That's why
hurt.
Illinois is so excited about him because he
He
was
got
coming
hurt
from
in high
Kentucky. Yeah.
school, and then Kentucky kind of recruited over him. He got out of that commitment. I think it was very much a mutual thing. Ended up at Illinois, was hurt a little bit, wasn't playing the kind of role that he wanted to at a certain stage. I think he had been starting, and then Underwood was going to bench him. So he sat out the rest of the year, ended up transferring. He goes to Louisville and he plays. It may not have been all his fault because he played for a historically awful team with Kenny
Yeah.
Payne at the helm. And so then he finds his way to UCLA and it clicks. And I think they're going to, if they're smart, I think they're going to do, and there's no reason for them not to with their personnel. They're going to play him in exactly the same kind of role they did last year. Where, yeah, he can help out as a secondary guy on the ball, but primarily go shoot the ball.
Yeah.
Go shoot the ball, go defend, don't make mistakes. And he did that very well last year.
Then we have Trent Perry, 6'4" guard, averaging 3.7 points a game, only played about 11 minutes a game, shot 37, 34, and 86.
Yeah, and he was a highly regarded player coming in last year as a freshman. Those numbers are solid. They're okay. But clearly he was a guy more the norm for freshmen than say a Jace Richardson. Perry is an example of what's more normal, where they need a year to really acclimate and adjust to playing at a higher level. So I think they expect they could get more out of him this year. I don't know how much bigger his role is going to be. I could see it growing a bit, but there's still a lot of capable guards around in this program that would seem to be ahead of him. So I don't think he's going to start. But this is a guy who's got some talent. So now it's just about growing in confidence and finding consistency and level of performance.
Then we have Brandon Williams. He was injured last year, so 6'7" sophomore, now redshirt sophomore. He averaged as a freshman 17 minutes a game and started 14 times. So a guy who got some time and is kind of a little bit of a loss from last year not to be out on the floor.
Yeah, and I expect that, again, they've got Daly most likely as their starting three man, but Williams can give them good depth. And, 2 years ago, he said he started 14 times. That was for a bad UCLA team and one that was going very, very young as well. And it just didn't work. So it might not necessarily be quite the statement you might otherwise think that he started 14 times as a freshman. But I do think it's nice to have a guy with a little bit of experience in the system now back, and maybe he doesn't have to play as large a role, but it can be more impactful.
Yeah. And finally, for returning players, we have Eric Feeney, 6'4" redshirt freshman guard. And as we get into the transfers, it's why he may have a little bit of trouble getting on the floor, but you never know at this point who's going to make it on and who's not.
Yeah, you don't. It's possible that a red shirt could find their footing and end up forcing their way into the rotation. But as I mentioned when talking about Perry a second ago, it's a lot of candidates for minutes in the UCLA
Yeah.
backcourt. So I think unless Freeney can do something really, really well, like say he comes in and he's shooting the ball extremely well. If he can't do something like that at a high level, I think it's going to be tough for him to earn minutes.
And then we'll go through the newcomers to the team. And the one that everyone talked about, one that Michigan State fans are obviously familiar with, is Donovan Dent, the 6'2 point guard. He played at New Mexico, where he averaged 20.4 points a game, 6.4 assists per game to 3.1 turnovers. So a big, a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, but a lot of assists, big playmaker. He was a Mountain West player of the year. He shot 49, 41, and 78, got more than 6 free throws a game. And as I mentioned, Michigan State players, fans will definitely know him well. And he was probably one of the biggest portal, certainly early in the season,
For
early
sure.
in the transfer season. He was probably the number one point guard, but he went quickly. It was over pretty quickly once he said he was leaving New Mexico. He ended up in UCLA. And so then everyone started talking about other stuff, but he's definitely a big get for UCLA.
Well, he's from Southern California.
Right.
And
Was he somewhere before he was at New Mexico? I feel like he was
what's that?
he was somewhere else before New Mexico, wasn't he?
Um,
I feel like came
Let
from
me
somewhere
look.
else,
I
but
don't know that that's the case, but I know that
I'll look it up.
UCLA, he wanted to be recruited by UCLA is the way the story goes. Um, and I've heard Mick Cronin talk about it, and he just was not good enough at that point.
Yeah.
No, Dent played all 3 years at New Mexico
Okay. All right.
and really, really grew as a player. I mean, you look at his, he went from 5.6 points a game as a freshman to 14 as a sophomore to 20 last year as a junior. So he's done exactly what you want to see your players do. He got better every season.
Yeah.
If you remember the Michigan State game against New Mexico, Dent, as I recall it, and I haven't gone back and looked at it, but my recollection is Dent was really held in check for maybe the first 3 quarters of that game.
I think so. Yep.
And then he started making an impact late, but it was too little too late. Michigan State did a pretty good job with him, as I recall. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right about his being one of the elite portal gets. And it was, again, essentially just gift wrapped for
Yeah.
UCLA. Like, I don't think anybody else was ever in the mix. He wanted to go home, he wanted to play for UCLA. Now he's proven that he's worthy of that. UCLA brought him in, and he could be what he represents is something last year's UCLA team did not have. They were kind of point guarding it by committee. I mentioned Dylan Andrews played some. Sky Clark played there a little bit. You know, they had
Yep.
a number of guys pitch in. This is the guy who's going to play, 35 minutes a night. He's the guy. Uh, the Big Ten has a lot of very, very good point guards. We've been talking about them. We haven't talked about the best one yet in Braden Smith, but
Yeah.
Braden Smith is probably the only guy I would put ahead of Dent. I might put Dent just a shade ahead of a guy like Bruce Thornton
Hmm.
in the point guard hierarchy in the league, but the league is stocked with great point guards. Some of them score more than others, but there are a lot of high level guys. But Donovan Dent, if he can play at the level that they expect, which means, I always talk about point guards as a force multiplier. It's great that he could score, and he will score for this team. I don't expect him to score 20 a night, but he'll score a lot. But the bigger thing to me is that playmaking. Does he
Yeah.
make everybody around him better? If he does that, then he has multiplied his impact beyond even just himself individually. He's made the whole rest of the team better as well. And that's a big deal. And I think if UCLA wants to be competing, in this upper tier of the Big Ten, maybe a little bit closer to the top, they're 4 games back of Michigan State last year. If they want to be a little closer to the top, and they want to have a legit chance of getting to the second weekend or beyond, it's probably, if it happens, it's going to be because Donovan Dent had a great year.
And then we come to Xavier Booker. Obviously, fans see the show are familiar with Xavier Booker, 6'11 forward, stretch averaged 4.7 points a game, 2.2 rebounds a game last year for Michigan State. Shot 42, 23, and 79. And just never, aside from having his great game against UCLA, or was it in North Carolina? In North Carolina,
It was
North
North
Carolina had a great,
Carolina.
yeah,
Yep.
had a great game against North Carolina. It kind of looked like the light came on. It sort of dimmed again after that, and it just did not seem like things sort of clicked with him, and then he just faded down the end of the season too. So, going from a place where he was one of the reasons he came to Michigan State, as far as we know, or at least that's what he and his people said, was he wanted someplace that would challenge him. As far as Tom Izzo, he's heading basically the same sort of situation in UCLA. So, like we've mentioned before, kudos to him for recognizing his weakness and that trying to find ways to get better.
Yeah, it's a disappointment to be sure because uh, you could see the potential in him. But what was really disappointing is, if you remember his freshman season, he actually had some solid games down the stretch.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, oh my God, the lights turned on and he's a 20 and 10 guy, but you saw it, you felt like it was starting to come together. And then on the trip to Spain, he had one really good game and then a couple others that weren't as good, but were still, they weren't enough to put you off the idea that, okay, Book's ready to step up.
Yeah.
And then it just never happened. And as you said, it was worse than just his minutes slipped. He basically fell out of the rotation late in
Yeah.
the year. When they started tightening it up just a bit, went from I think 11 to 10, he was the odd man out. And honestly, there was no case. His freshman year, you heard a lot of people screaming and moaning that he should be playing more, he should be starting, blah, blah, blah. You didn't hear any of that last year because
No.
it was obvious. It was case closed. Like he was not able to do the things. I think he made progress as a defender and a rebounder, but not nearly fast enough. And then the one thing you thought he could do and actually did pretty well as a freshman, he did miserably last year, which is shoot the three. If a
Right.
player like Xavier Booker isn't hitting threes, he's bringing nothing
Yeah.
when he plays the way that he did. So that's why he fell out of the rotation. They weren't getting anything from him. So
Yeah.
he transfers, which I think made sense. I think sometimes we just talked about it, right? Sometimes a change of scenery is the best thing for you. And it's a pretty big departure in terms of that, the environment going from the upper Midwest to Southern California, Westwood, all that
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
with that. But I will say, and you mentioned this, in terms of the kind of expectations for the kind of player he needs to be and how hard he's going to be coached, nothing's that different. And you do have to say it's to his credit that the easiest thing in the world would have been for him to try and find some play, transfer to like a Creighton. They say, hey
Yeah.
man, just come in and shoot threes. We don't need you to defend. We don't need you to rebound. We're not gonna put you on the bench because of that. If you don't do that, we want you in there to contribute offensively. That would have been a very easy thing for him to do, and it probably wouldn't have worked out for him. It probably wouldn't have put him in a better position to play professionally or whatever his ceiling is at this point. Instead, he went to a place that's also going to provide real structure and expectations. And what's interesting is Cronin says that they've convinced him he needs to be a five. I'm not sure he was convinced of that during his time at Michigan State. I
Yeah.
certainly wasn't convinced of it
No.
because he didn't do the things you need a five to do. He wasn't reliable in ball screen defense, and then he wasn't going to be strong enough around the rim. So you couldn't play him at the five consistently. But Cronin is intending on doing that. They brought him in to be the starting five man. So that's a risk.
Yeah.
If it pays off, Cronin's going to look like a genius. And I don't rule out the possibility that it could pay off. Say this all the time with big men, especially ones that have a lot of potential that hasn't been realized. You can't predict when the light turns on or even if it does, but if it does, it could go from 0 to 60 in a hurry. And it feels like Book's kind of at that inflection point. He's being given another opportunity to be a key part of a good team. Now he's got to do his bit. Um, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't skeptical about him as a 5 man, but he's going
Yeah.
to have to be. They need somebody or a couple somebodies to emerge, and he's one of those names. And if he doesn't, it's going to be a problem for UCLA.
Yeah. As we'll go
Uh,
through the rest of the lineup here in just a little bit,
but
you'll
it's
see
going to
that.
be, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch to see how that develops, because we all know the risk reward equation there, and it's it's not crazy for a Michigan State fan to be skeptical.
Yeah.
That's actually the
Well, yeah.
rational position.
I, I think so. I think if Michigan State fans were looking at Xavier Booker now playing the 5 next year, I I I can't imagine how much gnashing of teeth there'd be. So this is definitely one of those situations, him heading to UCLA, that it's a mutually sort of uh, acceptable sort of departure. I think Michigan State was okay with him leaving, and he was okay. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure Tom Izzo would have been okay with him sticking around, but I think the reality is like it's going to be really hard to find minutes for you going
right. Where
forward.
was he going to play?
Yeah,
Because with again, we've talked about this. We'll talk about it more when we do our MSU preview, but we heard it from coaches, and you heard rumblings if you knew who to talk to during the season last year. By the midpoint of the season, Jesse McCullough was a better player.
yeah,
Now they didn't want to burn his red shirt by that point, but he was a better player. So if you know that's the case coming into the season, you know where Carson Cooper is, you know where Kohler is, and at least initially, you had Cam Ward and Caleb Glenn. Oh, and you
right.
might you might choose to put Cohen Carr at the 4 for spot minutes on top of all that. Where
Yeah,
is Book's role? It wasn't there. So I think it was kind of a mutual decision. And again, I give him credit. He did not take the easy way out.
yep,
Now he's
exactly.
just got to make good on that.
Well, he might have had a season that was in the gutter, but make sure that your gutters are taken care of. You're not living in the gutter for the rest of the winter and the fall. Contact the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters if you have any sort of problems with your gutters, whether they're full of leaves and debris, or maybe you have a tree growing in it like me. Have the brothers come out, check it out, take care of it. They can clean it out. It's real quick, very inexpensive. Or maybe you need sections of gutter replaced or repaired, whatever it might be. The good brothers can do it for you. They do fantastic work. They get on the ladder so you don't have to. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. And you can do that at our support page, of course, at tffinots.com/support. There you can contact Kurt or Greg, depending on what side of the state you live on, whether you're in the southeast side or the west side of the state. They'll come out and take care of whatever it might be, get you a quick estimate. They've taken care of Rod's place. They've taken care of my place. They do great work. We both are very happy with the service and professionalism of the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters. So check them out today. You'll be glad you did. All right, so continuing on our new additions to UCLA, another big man, Stephen Jamerson, 6'10", 215-pound transfer from San Diego, where he averaged 10 points a game, 7.8 rebounds a game, shot 56% from the floor, and 68% from the line. He's obviously a little bit thin at 6'10", 215, but he's going to be a guy probably is going to be a consideration at the 5 if needed.
Yeah, and the issues would seem to be similar to Book,
Yeah.
except maybe he's a little more consistent in other ways. I mean, I only saw him uh, play once in the NCAA tournament, and you saw the lack of strength. That for sure, that's an issue. But again, that's a problem for Book as well. So
Exactly.
I'm not going to rule out that Jamerson could end up as a starter with this team. We'll have to see, but I think he's going to play a lot regardless.
Then we have Jamar Brown, 6'5", grad transfer from Kansas City, where he averages 17 points a game on 45, 40, and 90 shooting. I mean, he's obviously a shooter. And of course, the obvious question is coming from University of Kansas City, can he translate to the Big Ten to the high major level?
Yeah, and I think with Daly and Clark, the likely starters on the wings, you're putting him in a mix with Trent Perry and Brandon Williams for reserve minutes, and I think he'll find some if that shooting translates. I mean, 40% shooting from three. If you can come close, if you can even be a mid 30s guy, there are minutes available for Brown. This was not a great shooting team last year.
Right.
They've got some individuals coming back who could shoot, but some of the guys who left were maybe a little disappointing. So this could be an improved shooting team if the guys who came back that were good, like Bilodeau and Clark, remain solid, but they get better supporting performances out of guys like Brown than what they had last year.
And then next we have Anthony Peoples, a 6'9", 225-pound sophomore transfer from North Carolina Central, where he averaged 5 points a game, 2.4 rebounds a game, and played about 12 minutes a game.
Yeah, this to me looks like let's get a big body for practices and break glass in case of emergency. I just I don't see, Williams is going to help probably, and Daly could too, I guess, as backing up Bilodeau at the four, but they're probably not going to look to play a lot of minutes where it's not Bilodeau. Um, and then we've talked about the center spot. The one thing about Peoples is he might be a little bit stronger than the other two guys, but he's also not like a 260-pound bruiser. So
Right.
I don't know. I think he's a big body to help make practices more competitive, and he offers you an insurance policy inside, but that's probably about it.
And finally, Mick Cronin realized that he actually could recruit high school players still and got Markel Elston, who came in late, 6'1" point guard from New York City.
Yeah, and I think the only role that might be available here is if they decide they're better off with him playing those backup minutes behind Dent as opposed to, swinging Sky Clark or even Trent Perry over there for a few
Right.
minutes. They're going to play Dent heavy. I mean, that's just obvious. Barring foul trouble or injuries, that's what's going to happen. So there's not a lot available. I mean, I'd be surprised if Dent doesn't average at least 33, 34 minutes a game because you Mick Cronin's teams usually don't run a ton. So I think he could probably get away with that. So absent something weird, I think it's going to be an uphill battle for Alston as a freshman.
And so overall, looking at UCLA, I I mean you can see a lot of a lot of potential promise for this team, but the big question mark has got to be at the five. If you're relying on
Yep.
Xavier Booker to be your five spot, it could be a huge limit as far as, I hate to use the term, but the ceiling on this team. But you wonder if that kind of lowers it a little bit. But unless he, performs to the upside, I suppose.
It's why I have two things are the reason why I have them fourth instead of say second. I mean, there's no world they were going to be ranked higher than Purdue for me,
Sure.
but they could have been the best of the rest, but for that five position and the travel. Because again, I'm going to insist, I'm going to bet the travel costs them a couple games relative to the other team. The other teams, the teams I've got ranked ahead of them, are all teams in the Eastern time zone.
Right.
So that's part of it. That's part of my calculus, at least. But the five spot is the other problem because neither candidate brings strength or bulk to the equation.
Right.
And that
Right.
is a factor in the Big Ten. If you don't have enough of that in this league, you can run into problems defensively and on the glass. This was not a great rebounding team last year. I have to say, when I look at it, I don't know if I buy into the notion that they're going to be improved. I think the only way they're improved is if guys like Bilodeau and Daly take a big leap and just get a lot better. Because other than that, I don't see where it comes from. The strengths are obvious. Bilodeau and Daly are proven offensive players at the two forward spots.
Right.
Sky Clark has been a good shooter, and maybe can step up a little bit in terms of volume. Then you got guys like Perry and Williams. Brown is a transfer. It looks like there's a good core. And then you add Dent, who should be exactly the kind of player they did not have last year, which is a guy where you just put the ball in his hands and let him go make it happen offensively.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the other question I have, and we're not going to know until we see it unfold. Again, this was a very good defensive team last year. At their best, they were stifling. They weren't always at their best, but number 5 in the country in turnover creation without being like a wild, insane, gambling kind of defense. It was
Yeah.
tough. They were tough to break down for a lot of people. Can they get even close to that level with this group? I'm not sure about that. Mick Cronin's a really good defensive coach, so it's possible he's able to work that out. But something that a lot of the guys they lost were inconsistent offensively, but they were generally pretty good on the defensive end. I
Yeah.
don't know that I believe this group is going to be better. But Donovan Dent is a huge add. And Bilodeau and Daly, you've got 2, and Clark, you've got 3 really high quality, proven Big Ten starters. So I can't put them any lower than 4th. I can't put them any higher than that. This just seems to me like locked in. Like I don't see arguments that I find compelling in either direction to lower them or raise them, at least until we start seeing some actual games. If they come out of the chute and either Booker or Jamerson or both are actually pretty solid at the 5, well, that raises their level. That raises their potential. If Dent struggles for some reason, you drop them, But right now,
Yeah.
based on what we know, what we expect, I feel like this is a good spot for them. Just kind of on the cusp, maybe a shade better than last year overall, although that's risky because, again, the defensive end, I don't know. But it feels like they're just on the cusp of being a team you'd think about in the title mix, but not quite, just outside of it.
Yeah. Well, and with the Beat Rod contest, the obvious advantage here is that you being the audience, have until the first Big Ten game is played in first week of December or so,
Right.
and to get
So
your
they get
entries
to
in.
see some of this unfold.
Yeah, and so I mean, a lot of these teams now, what teams are in November is definitely not what they are in February and March. There's no question about that. However, they're definitely something. You have some data points versus right now we're just kind of going off, how these pieces going to fit together. What role can people have? I'm very skeptical as well about Booker. But if you told me at the end of that by February he's averaging 12 and 5, I wouldn't say, well, that's impossible. Like you could
Right.
imagine it
Right.
actually happening. You've
Yep.
seen the skill, you've seen the times when he can get it done. It's just, what is he going to be giving up on the defensive end and the inside? You got a lot of pretty good centers again in the Big Ten. You can envision sort of anything like with most of these teams. You can see the weaknesses, you can see the question marks, and it always comes down to how they filled and how those going to be answered. Is it the positive or the negative? And we're not going to really know for quite a while. But maybe by December you have some idea what's going to go on in Los Angeles with UCLA. So, anything else to add besides we head out of here, Rod?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's going to be a good year for UCLA, maybe a little short of a great one, and I do wonder if at the end of it, if Mick Cronin is going to look back and say, I didn't need a star at the 5, but I needed actual physical presence, and if I'd had that, we would have been even better because I think that's a possibility.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny too is we've on the message boards, Michigan State fans, and I hear this even when I listen to other podcasts of Michigan State basketball, people clamoring for upgrades to the 5 and just go get someone else go get another 5 out of the portal, et cetera, et cetera. It's not easy. I mean, if you're looking at like a really high upgrade for UCLA is Xavier Booker, well, like most people in Michigan State are like, now maybe at UCLA they're very excited about this. I don't know.
But this is my point. Um, they were in the portal for their 2 guys, okay, and
Right.
they got 2 guys who have some similar strengths and weaknesses. Emphasis on weakness, and I'm not saying, well, you got to go out and find a guy like Wisconsin did to play the five. I don't even think that. But it did strike me as interesting that UCLA did not try and go land, say, a 6'9", 240 kind of guy who rebounds decently, is a good defender, maybe not much of a scorer, that kind of player. If for no other reason than to have that kind of player on your roster available.
Yeah, if you need it.
Maybe
Yeah,
not even
exactly.
start. Maybe you still start Booker, but someone of a different type that you can look at Michigan State last year. Part of the reason Michigan State succeeded is they had a lot of different cards they could play at that spot. Nobody involved had an all Big Ten season. But when you looked at the totality of what they got from the five, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's because they could adjust. You know, I've just, look, if Booker or Jamerson or both turn out to be great players, then this is all moot. But when I look at it, it does make me wonder, man, are they going to, at the end of the year, feel like they were one, 6-6 kind of player who could bring physicality to the table away from being really good instead of just
Yeah.
good? That's
Well,
my
so
question.
we did, yeah, and we did not talk about him, but Alex Mara obviously is one of the big key departures because we're going to talk about him in the next show when we talk about the next team. But if he was around, obviously he'd be the starter, I would think, for UCLA.
Yeah,
But
maybe,
he's
but
also a similar player
there
in
it
some
is.
ways to
Yes.
Booker as well, right?
He's
But just a little taller.
he's we're talking about obviously Mara. Um yeah, he's the problem with Mara was two things. It was inconsistency, and I think that was a function of the lack of physical strength
Uh-huh.
and conditioning. Could you play him for long stretches? What really made it, and it rarely gets talked about, what really made Zach Edey, as much as anything else, obviously he became a very skilled player. He was a massive human being. But what really made that thing work is that his conditioning got better and better. You normally look at a guy 7'4" and 300 pounds, or 7'3" and 210 pounds, closer to Mara. And the first thing you think is, is he going to be able to get up and down the court 5 times in a row without dying? And frequently the answer is no. Like you have to, and that was the deal with UCLA last year. There were points, Mara had one stretch in the season where he was very good. And when he was very good, it's loud because a 7'3" guy is going to block shots. If
Yeah.
he's rebounding well, that'll show up. If he's scoring well, it's pretty much indefensible, undefensible. But it wasn't consistently there because of those things I mentioned: lack of strength, lack of conditioning. So even if he had come back, I don't know that it would have changed this equation. They probably wouldn't have added one of the two guys they added,
Sure. Yeah.
but it wouldn't have, the same questions I would have had. I would have been saying, well, Mara could be the answer, but can he give you 25 minutes of high quality basketball a night? Or is it more like 12, like it
Right.
was last year? I think that's going to be a question for Michigan, by the way.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll leave it there and we'll be back with the next team, the number 3 team in our Big Ten previews. And so until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.